Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back again to As I Live and Grieve. Another great episode. Yes. With us today is Jane Edberg. Jane, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And also with us is Kelly. Of course, she's found time in her busy schedule to pop in and be my co-host today. So hi, Kelly.
Hello, everyone.
All righty. Let's get started. And before I start with the questions, of which I almost always have many, Jane, could you just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself? Who is Jane Edberg?
Yeah, primarily I'm an artist who taught art and photography for many, many years. I have a master's degree from UC Davis, and I taught there, and I taught at Gavilan College, which is a small college in California. And I have continually, most of my life, made art and exhibited all over the world. I used art primarily as a way to process a childhood that was very difficult. And that's putting it lightly. And so doing that, I had found that I could process what I was going through and process my feelings and began to understand how to look at the world through another lens, not just the cultural lens, which isn't always correct.
Right.
And that the culture tells you to do one thing, but you're feeling like that doesn't fit me.
Sure.
Especially with grief and I had a CPTSD from my childhood, and that kind of trauma shows up in many, many ways and needs to be resolved as well. And so I was working on that, and my artwork had a lot to do, my professional artwork had a lot to do with healing past trauma. And then my son dies. It's like, oh, you think you know it, right? And then the child dies, right? And he was 19.
Oh,
that was 26 years ago. And I knew right away that I knew that was such a huge problem that it looked bigger than art. And how was being creative going to get me to understand something that seemed impossible at the time?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it just devastating, right? Yeah. And I felt like I'd lost myself, my connection with family, friends, life, everything, the whole world, everything, is changed in a moment.
Sure. Absolutely.
And including like my projects that I was working on, art projects, which had to do with childhood trauma. And how was I ever going to use art to process something like death and the loss of a child? That seemed completely impossible at the time. Interestingly enough, I was actually processing things, but not in a way that I would have called art. So in other words, normally I would draw and paint and do narratives with photography about some of my childhood trauma in a kind of like mythological looking images or metaphorical, using symbology and so forth. Now I was like wiped out. I felt like there was no me left to even conjure anything that could even match what I was feeling. But my daughter pointed out about a year later that I was doing things that she thought might be art. Thank goodness for these daughters.
Right. Absolutely.
They're smart. And she was right, but I didn't know at first what she was talking about. And so this is going to sound very odd. At one point, about almost a year, it was coming up on the anniversary of my son's death. I pulled the box of ashes out. I hadn't buried him. I still had this box of ashes. I hadn't done anything. I just couldn't. They're sort of like hid in my studio in a corner for a long time. Like,
I get that.
Like, you don't even get what that is, that thing with the ashes in it, really foreign and weird. And I brought it out and I thought, what if there's something to this? What if I can learn something from it? So I opened it up and I poured the ashes out and I saw that they're little pieces of bone and ash, and you get a real, wake up call, right? This is what's left, 6 pounds of ash. And, from a guy that was like, 160, 180 or something, it's like, this is weird. And it was so abstract. And as an artist, it looked like a material. And I thought, oh, I'm just going to touch it and see what happens. And I saw my fingerprints, and then I saw my palm print. And then I started to observe that there was something about them. So I stood them and made a very fine ash and put both of my hands in and pulled out. And then I saw my lifeline, and it was like a powerful kind of like, I'm within this drama of my son's remains. Right. I see my own reflection, and I put my face in the ashes. Oh. And when I pulled back, my face stared back at me. So, and at that very moment where I pulled my head up, I thought my daughter was still at school. She came home early. She came through the living room where I was all set up, and I had a camera because I was going to photograph this stuff. Right. And she walked in, and I've got ash falling off of my face and this bowl of, she's looking at me, she goes, do you need help? Oh, like, wow. Actually, because she knew I was an artist, she meant, did I need help photographing it? Right. I thought, man, have you lost your complete mind? You know? And I said yes. And she came over and she helped me photograph my face with ash, photograph the images in ash. And that's one of the first images in my book, in the very first chapter, about facing ashes. Right. Literally. Yeah. And now that photo is also on your website. It is. Correct? Because website. I saw that photo, which now that I've heard the story is so much more impactful. Isn't it? It really is. And who in their right mind does that? An artist does that sort of thing, and someone who's grieving, because we're not always in our right mind. Yeah. Exactly. Right. Yeah. But it was certainly what you needed to do at the time. Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I didn't expect it at all. I was just like, wow. I just like boo-hooed right into the ashes. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Now, so it's very powerful to see that. It certainly is, especially when you know the story. Yes. Yeah. Right. Now, you mentioned your book, and the title of your book is The Fine Art of Grieving. It's backwards. It is backwards. Anyways, The Fine Art of Grieving. Yep. It's not backwards to me. Oh, but, it's not. Okay, great. And it won the Literary Titan Book Award, which is nice. So yes, I saw that, and I read the reviews on your website. They're great, aren't they? It looks like an amazing book, and it's a memoir. It's a memoir, and it's filled with images and art. Uh-huh. So now you mentioned taking pictures. Well, it's filled with photographs, and the photographs are of things like the ash photographs of my face. Imprint of my face and my son's ash. And then there's a photograph of my face, 3 of them in slow motion, what grief looks like. And then there are some photographs of my family. My son died on the railroad tracks. He was crossing from one side of town to the other, and he had to walk across the railroad tracks. Oh. He was inebriated, but he was walking, still not safe. He even got out of the way, but he was in the foul line. It's a rough story. Oh, that's so traumatic. But interestingly enough, when he was a little boy, he was about, 8. So he said to me, we were walking down the railroad tracks in the same town. And it was a part of railroad tracks where the trains didn't go anymore, but you could get to town really faster by going down the railroad tracks. Plus, we loved collecting weird stuff on the railroad tracks. We're the creative types, right? We bring home all kinds of weird little dumb things that, piano keys and books with grass growing through them and stuff, It's right. It's just the way artists are. But he said, when we were on our way home, he said, oh, can you photograph me? Because we all had cameras. We were taking pictures because I was teaching photography. My kids, of course, all had cameras. Mm-hmm. Even my little one that was like 4 at the time. Mm-hmm. So my 3 kids and I were walking along, taking pictures. And he says, take a picture of me on the railroad tracks dead. On the railroad tracks dead. On the railroad tracks dead. And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, like Roadrunner, like a cartoon. And how old was he? About 8. I have the image. I'll show you. It's interesting because it's like, how do these things happen, right? It's like you couldn't make this stuff up. So he laid down on the railroad tracks. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you can see that or not. Oh, my goodness. Wow. And I photographed him. I'm like, okay. And that's also in the book, of course. Yep. And I didn't find it till about 19 years after he died. I'd forgotten about it entirely. Mm-hmm. And I was going through some archive of photographs, and I went, oh my God, what is this? And then I remembered, what we had done. And I thought, what a story. Oh my God. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, okay. So I have this could be a somewhat profound question. Okay.
For me personally, I could look at a piece of art, a photograph, whatever, and whether I knew context or not, I can be awestruck, I can be angered, I can have a very intense emotional reaction to something like that. Mm-hmm. It could even be a piece of art where you can't really tell what it is. It could just be some abstract piece. Yeah. I can personally have a response. There may be listeners out there that don't have that intensity, so to speak.
Yeah.
So as a professional artist, photographer, and one who has taught it and everything, is that something that can be taught? Can someone learn to acquire that affinity, if you will?
I call
art?
it vision.
Okay.
Absolutely. Art is learned. We aren't born with the creative bone.
Okay.
We learn it. And I drew a lot when I was little, and I liked looking at things. And my grandmother used to show me, look at the way the light is hitting the flowers, and lighting them all up in the field. And it's like, if somebody shows you that stuff, you're going to learn. You're going to learn to look, and you're going to learn to see things, and you're going to learn to feel it. I mean, everybody's different, of course, depending on our sensibilities and our mental health. And there's a whole myriad of things, right? Mm-hmm. But I, as a teacher, could teach people to expand their vision and their openness to what they're seeing and how to interpret and how to feel comfortable with what they see and what they feel is theirs, their interpretation.
Right.
It doesn't have to be right, even.
Right. And and the same thing is true of music as well.
Yes.
I mean, absolutely. I can listen to a piece of music and it will take me somewhere, just somewhere. And then other pieces will be like nails on a chalkboard.
Jarring. Yeah.
Something like that.
Listen to it long enough, though, if you expose yourself and be open to it, you might never like it, but you might appreciate it.
Exactly.
And that was one of my favorite classes to teach, was art appreciation. You don't have to like it, but try appreciating it because somebody took the time to make it.
Yeah, and try to understand it better.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, and then something very common, you talked about symbology. Something very common, one who is grieving, is the cardinal. I don't know how the image of the cardinal as a symbol of your loved one paying a visit or giving you a message, I don't know how the cardinal got chosen. But can you, as an artist, think of other things other than a cardinal that could be symbolic?
It's often winged creatures, isn't it? Like
butterflies,
a butterfly, or
dragonflies,
hummingbird.
Right.
You hear about those a lot. Or even a leaf that's coming, like it comes down from the tree and then goes back up.
Or a feather. A feather's another one.
Yeah, I think that lightness of being is we're so attracted to it because we're in the heaviness of being.
Oh, I like that.
I just think that we're so weighted down that when we see something that can take off or just fly or land and be very gentle, it also is a reflection of our vulnerability too, because those creatures can be killed very easily or broken very easily. So
I like that. The lightness compared to the heaviness.
Yeah, it's a lightness of being compared to our heavy being.
Yeah, I like that. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. Wow. And for you personally, in your grief, after you learned of your son's death, what is your son's name?
Nanda.
Okay. After his death, and of course I know you, like everyone, were hit with that initial devastation of grief, especially for a traumatic death.
Yeah. I wanted to die.
that you've experienced.
Yeah.
How did you come to that conclusion, or how did you decide to turn to art? Was it just very natural for you, or did you make a conscious decision?
Well, like I said, like I was making art. I'd been creative all my life because I've been shown how to be creative. My father helped me learn how to draw. My grandmother showed me things. And, just my life was filled with a lot of stimulation where I saw stuff. And then I had childhood trauma, which I was sorting through with art. I found, and there's a story in my book about, my mother was very angry with me and trying to do my hair and put it in curls and stuff. And I was wailing and screaming, and then she was tugging and pulling. And I finally got out from her grips and I'm in this little chiffon dress. I'm, getting ready to go in the backyard. And I see that there's mud in the garden and I get a stick and I start whacking it because I'm so mad. And she comes out and like whack, that was back in the. But I saw the look on her face before she did that. And the look on her face was, I made her feel a certain way. And it was so powerful that the whack with the stick or with her hand or whatever on my butt was nothing in comparison.
Right.
And I thought there's power in doing something visual. And I saw the visual of it. I got mud up on the wall of the house, all over her flowers. I mean, what a naughty child, right? I think it was all of like 4, but yeah, a little bit of spunky. But yeah, I think that was it. And then I saw that over and over again, that when I did certain things, it got people's attention, and not necessarily, I didn't want the attention to be on me, but it just got their attention,
Right.
Right. And so when my son died, I'd lost that. So I'd learned how to make art and show it to people and get their attention for the thing that I wanted to express.
Okay. All right.
And when he died, I couldn't do it. I'm like, that's just useless. That's not serving me. I can't make art anymore. I'm done. I'm like washed out. And I still had to teach it. It was very difficult. I was very conflicted.
Right.
And then, like I said, after that ash incident, my daughter, she pointed out the other things that I was doing. I had taken my son's blanket, which is a nice red cotton blanket, down the river, and I swam with it and had my husband take photographs of me swimming in the river. And I didn't know why I was doing it. I just felt like, in some way, I felt like being in water would be wonderful. And I wanted to take Nanda with me because he loved that place. He loved that river, and he was a water boy. So I took his blanket, as a kind of symbolism.
It sounds like a ritual.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what I did seemed ritual, but it also was art. I was expressing something, and I wasn't clear until I actually started writing that the river always changes. And when you're in grief, you feel like nothing, like the world has stood still and everything's gone on ahead of you.
Definitely.
And I saw that. I'm like, I'm not quite there yet, but I will get there.
Right.
So it was a beautiful reminder, and to feel that freeness in the water and the floating and the lightness of being, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So there was some things that I did, and I took photographs along the way and wrote about it. That those photographs early on, I didn't know what I was doing. It just turned out to be art. I didn't think I was making art. I was surprised when my daughter pointed it out. And then I went, ooh, I can have an intent. Now I can actually say, I need to work on this and this and this, and express those things about losing self, about gaining a new self, about what does it mean to heal grief? What is grief? So really starting to investigate the embodiment of grief inside myself and with other people and my relationship to the world. Was I going to just sit in grief the whole time? Hell no. I was like ready. I was ready to embark on a life that was different than that. I didn't want that.
Yeah, you found your purpose.
I did.
In your grief, you found your purpose.
I did.
And where, how, when did the decision to put it into a book?
It started pretty early because I couldn't, if you guys think about your loss, do you remember that it's kind of like you trying to suck the world through like a little nanotube? Like you can't process anything. Everything's too gigantic.
Right.
And so I couldn't make art. And I'm like, I can document, though. I'm a good documenter. And I don't know what I'm looking at here, so maybe I'll write it down and look at it later, because maybe later I'll know something. And it was true. I sort of came to at some point.
Right.
So I started writing things down, really journal, boring, today I did blah, blah, blah. And then I felt this wave of blah, 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 So it was all very journal writing kind of stuff, but there were also some observations in there, like the river. Like, what is a river? A river is never the same. We're never the same. We are constantly changing, and we don't feel like it when we're in grief. We'll feel like we're doing that one awful thing, right? Just buried in it. It informed me that I too could be like the river. I could decide to flow more than being static and stuck in grief. And I think a lot of people get stuck in grief. There's just, I don't think there's enough resources to help people.
Yeah, and in your story, in your book, for someone who reads your book, who is grieving, what tidbits will they find that will help them?
Well, I was very, very thorough when I wrote this book, and so I don't think there's anybody. I've never met a person yet that didn't get something out of my book. Even people that haven't had a huge loss, they feel prepared in some way.
Right.
I didn't hold back. I really, it is a harrowing story. It's not just a story about that. It's also the story about, some of the childhood trauma and going through that as well. So it's got a few layers of stuff. But my premise is, and it was early on in my grief when I went to a grief group, and I asked the grief counselor, because we were going through all these questions, it felt like we were walking on eggshells around. I just want to throw myself on the ground and scream.
Right.
But I didn't, because I was going to be polite.
Yeah.
But I felt like there was this there are boundaries around how one can express their grief. And I thought, there's got to be wider than that. It just doesn't seem right. And I felt like a lot of the folks that were in that group were really suffering more from being held closed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not being able to express themselves. And when I started to bring in my art, boy, they were they had no idea. I started showing them before I even knew what I was doing. I was showing, I took some pictures at the river and I showed them. They're like, oh my God,
Right.
And it started to help them to do things. And I could see that it was moving them. They weren't feeling so static about what they were going through. There was some intent and you're on a voyage with grief, but you don't have to, grief doesn't have to be the boss.
Right.
It is in the very beginning. Let's be real.
Yeah, it is because, and I think the main reason it's the boss in the very beginning is because you are just too wiped out to even consider fighting it.
Right. There's so much shock that you
exactly.
You feel like you got put on a different planet and you're like, where are my people?
All you can do is make sure you breathe.
Yeah. Moment to moment.
Yeah.
Moment to moment.
Yeah.
So I had asked her, how long does grief last? And I was in that moment to moment time, that horrible, pillage of awfulness in the grief.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And she said forever. And it really pissed me off because I felt like nothing's forever. I was just in the river.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
I was on a mission to change that theory. There's a few theories out there. There's one where grief comes into your life and it's this big ball, right? Mm-hmm. And there's the thing, it doesn't get smaller. Nope. You just get bigger.
Yep.
But I disagree. I got bigger and my life got bigger, but grief got smaller for me. I worked on it. I don't have grief anymore. Mm-hmm. I can think about my son, talk about my son. I can, if I want to, I can. Mm-hmm. But I don't have anything that comes up and bites me anymore.
Yeah.
And that was by about the 7th year, I think, that I really had that under control.
Yeah.
And I miss him, but I don't think about him every day. I don't.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that I understand that idea of grief stays the same, but I don't believe it. I think that grief is made up of this myriad of emotions and complications. It is the most complex of all what a person goes through. I can't think of anything that's as complicated except maybe love.
Yeah.
Which I say love can help shrink grief and get it worked out and get it out of the way.
Yeah. Well, there's a quote that I absolutely love. It's one of my favorite. And the last line of the quote is that grief is just love with no place to go.
Yeah. However, I like that too. But I also think that for me, grief is love and there is a place to go and there is a place to be.
Yes.
And that the grief, you can start letting go of the pain, the suffering, right. and start to enjoy one's life and also enjoy the one that's gone, your dead one.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Love them and include them. And you have a different relationship. You just don't get to see them, which is a real sucky thing.
Absolutely. And I'm very familiar with the meme that you've described with the ball that, it shows that the container
very
it's in
popular.
Just gets bigger. It's very popular. Yeah. I prefer to think of it not as grief changing size, but changing in texture.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because initially it's extremely hard. It's a rock. I mean, it's there.
Oh, it's awful.
It's in your chest. It's in your stomach. It's in your gut. It's just, it's hard as a rock.
It takes up the room.
Right. And then eventually it starts to morph. It starts to get a little softer. And now, almost 7 years after Tom's been gone, I can, if I have a day where for some reason it's a little more present in my mind than others, I could just kind of smush it down and tuck it and just, I'm okay and I can deal with it later. So for me, it's a textural thing.
That's wonderful. I like the textural thing.
Yeah. So,
but I have to say, I just want to make sure that it's really clear that I believe that I don't have grief. If we'd have to describe grief. To me, grief is that where you're longing and there's a pain attached to the longing. Yeah. And there's a unrequited need for that person. Right. And it rips you apart. I mean, it's just in this devastation. And you think about it, and it literally takes over your life. It's like a weird addiction, right? Because you can't get rid of it. Yes, you understand. And I don't have any of that. I don't have any of it.
Yeah, I understand that. And I know there are many people out there that really kind of choose to hold on to that intense grief.
And I have no judgment about that. I think that's perfectly...
No, that's, we can all choose how we want to handle our grief, especially when we get to a certain point in that journey. We can have it as present as we want or as reticent as we want. We can do whatever we want with it.
Yeah. I think that that's true. And, for me, it went from my relationship to having, dealing with death and loss to making art in a relationship to the art around that loss, and then writing a book, and then the book being in relationship to my son. Yes. And then now that I finished the book, I went, oh my God, now what do I do? Like, I almost feel like I'm going to fall off a cliff. Right, right. But I've got some other projects going, so I'm
that's good. Are there other media in your book other than photographs, or?
There's one, yes. It's towards the end, and it's a woe agent.
A woe agent.
So I found a woman in my town that is much older than me, probably 30 years older than me. And she does a workshop called Clay is a Way, so that people can get their hands in this stuff and feel their emotions and make things out of it. It's a whole process of going through whatever trauma or loss or experience that you're having and making it into something that informs you about the next thing that you make.
Oh, interesting.
And it gives you a sense of purpose and meaning and so forth. It's very detailed. I'm making it sound really, a little woo-woo or whatever. No. But I ended up after making a lot of things in her workshops, I started taking a lot of them. I made these little creatures, and I wanted there to be something where you could take something that was bothering you about your grief, write it down, and tuck it into this little creature, and I called them woe agents.
Oh.
So I don't know if you can see that or not.
I can. Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
So the little woe agent is like, bring it on. I know all about this dark stuff,
Yeah.
And you can take it out of your body for a while and have a freaking break.
Oh, that's really neat. That's really cool.
So at my book launch, I made 100 of them, and I gave one to everyone.
Oh,
that came.
Now I'm sad I wasn't there.
No, I can send you one. Would you like one?
I would love one. I'd be happy. Yes, I'd be happy to buy it.
No, it's not for sale. It's they're little messengers, and I make them with sort of like I pray when I make them. I'm like, give this person some peace, just a little bit, even just a little.
Oh, I love it. I love the idea. I love everything about that.
Because there's angels. We love angels. Sure. We don't have anybody that represents I've been to the darkest, deep pit of despair. Bring it on. I'll take it on. You can just have a rest.
Oh, I like that. A woe agent.
They're a little bit grisly looking. They're not cute.
They have to be. They're
supposed to be.
They've been through a lot. They've been through a lot. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Sadly, our time is just flying away. This has been such great conversation. Kelly, do you have any questions that maybe I've talked too much and you haven't been able to get a word in?
My mind is just whirling at the different facets of grief and how each person can take it so differently. And I think it'll give me a good thing to think about and look at my own grief in ways that I've gone through things and how to maybe package them a little differently so I'm not impacted so much. And I thank you for that.
We have Yes, we have choices. I think that's the most remarkable thing when you finally go, I have a choice. Right. I can actually prepare this journey a little differently, or take a different route, or have a different attitude, or, any of that. And I think that's really, really helpful. And think I did it a million times through my grief process.
Yeah.
Sometimes I was like spitting mad, don't talk to me about it, I'll punch you in the nose, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And other times I was like, somebody please talk to me. You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, for me, I remember very distinctly standing there one day and saying, I do not want to live this way for the rest of my life.
Right.
That was it. That's from that point on. It was with intention. Whatever I did, with
intention is very important. I think you can build resilience.
Yep.
I really do.
Yes.
I think that, and I suffer with depression and other sorts of mental health issues.
Yep.
My whole life. I'm sort of like used to it. Like
Huh.
weird not to almost.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I'm always incorporating new ways of seeing, because I think that I can really be bored with a life that's just going down the same channel. And it's like, we don't get a whole lot of years. I'm like 68 now, and I'm like, I'm approaching 70. I'm getting to be an old lady, and I want to like have a life.
Yeah.
And I want a little bit, I don't want to like control necessarily, but I do like a say in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Jane, this is the point in our podcast. Every episode I do this, where I'm actually going to turn the microphone over to you and let you speak to our listeners without me leading you with questions or directing the conversation or anything. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. So the biggest message that I would like to send out into the world that's really important to me, because I've lived it, I've experienced it, I've tried it, and I didn't have an easy life. I might look like I did, but I didn't. And is that we do have choices, and that grief can be healed. I have healed my grief. So those two words, heal and grief being that devastating, awful, like can't dig yourself out of the emotional pit of it, and healing being pulling yourself out of the emotional pit of it and having a life and a new self in a new world with a new purpose and meaning. And that my book will show you how I did it. I don't think anybody should follow what I did, but everyone has an individual path, and they get to choose. If it's not working, try something else. Try lots of things. Try things that you swore you'd never do. Take trips. One thing that really helped me was doing service. I painted a mural in a child interview room in a police department. You can imagine children having to tell their stories.
Sure.
I went in there and painted this beautiful surround, sort of wildernessy, oceany kind of scene for them, so that they weren't stuck in just a dismal office. And it was remarkable to do something like that, because it wasn't just always me ruminating in my terrible life and terrible tragedies. Right. I got to give something in my vulnerability to somebody else that's suffering, that's even younger than me, you know, starting out their life. So those sorts of things are wonderful. And it doesn't have to be that. It can be, you can cook, you can, you know, take up running, you can, it takes a little while though. That first year, just eat lots of French fries. I don't know. That's what I did.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I could eat was French fries practically. I think the first year is such a struggle. The second year, the anesthesia wears off, and you know you have to do something, and you don't know what it is, and you're figuring it out. And then slowly but surely. So I want to offer hope that anybody that's experiencing grief, whether it's old or new, that there are many, many ways in which you can approach it. That's what I want to offer. And I think my book offers that perspective. At least offers how crazy you can be when you're in grief.
I'm sure the book does not showcase any craziness on your part.
A little bit, but not. Yeah.
This has been such a great conversation. Somehow I think we could go on for hours, just back and forth and talk about
it. We need to have dinner sometime.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Yeah, we'll just all meet virtually and eat our French fries.
Yeah,
that's right.
So to our listeners, again, thank you so much for tuning in. I love you guys. Wherever you are around the world, doesn't matter, because this is similar for all of us. We have a lot of parallels, perhaps. Our grief is different for each and every one of us. It's like snowflakes or fingerprints. Totally. Everyone's is different. And as Jane says, you have choices. Yeah. Don't always just assume that whatever your neighbor says or that friend of yours that is trying to be supportive but doesn't quite know what to say at the moment. You don't have to do what they say. You have choices. You do you.
Absolutely. Big time.
Someone told me at one point when I made a comment about something, and I can't even remember the details now, but they said that whatever you're doing is good enough until it isn't.
Right.
And you'll know when that is. You'll know when you have to make a change. Just keep an open mind for yourself. Sense what you're going through. Feel what you're feeling. Be honest with yourself.
Mm-hmm. The honesty part is big.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And then, take care of yourselves as well. We always talk about self-care. It's so important, especially when you're grieving, because let's face it, you got to take care of yourself, because likely that other people aren't going to be doing as good a job as you can do yourself. You know what you need.
Right. Yeah, that's really true.
So choices, take care of yourself.
You're with yourself 24/7. So.
Absolutely. So choices, open mind. There is hope, and Jane offers hope for everyone. And please come back again next time as we all continue to live and grieve. Thanks, Jane.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. I feel really honored to be here and really enjoyed talking with both of you. Lovely.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveandgrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.